Somewhere in southeastern Turkey, buried under a hilltop for over 10,000 years, there is a temple, not a small one. We're talking about massive stone pillars, some of them taller than a two-story house, some of them weighing 50 tons, carved with extraordinary detail, arranged in perfect geometric circles. And here is the part that stops archaeologists cold. The people who built it had no metal tools, no wheels, no writing, no pottery, no agriculture. By every definition we use to measure civilization, they didn't have one yet. And they built something that we still cannot fully explain. That site is called Gobekli Tepe, and it is just one piece of a much larger story. A story about who our ancestors actually were, what they were actually capable of, and why almost everything we assumed about the ancient world is turning out to be wrong. Let's start with what we thought we knew. For most of modern history, the story of human progress went like this. First came the hunter-gatherers. Simple people, primitive people, struggling to survive, following animals across the landscape, living in small scattered groups with no time for anything beyond the next meal. Then came farming, and farming changed everything. It gave people a stable food supply. It allowed them to stay in one place, and once they stayed in one place, they could build. They could organize. They could create religion, art, cities, civilization. That was the sequence. Survival first, then complexity, necessity first, then wonder. It's a clean story. It made sense. There was just one problem. It wasn't true. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt drove out to a hilltop in southern Turkey that had been surveyed 30 years earlier and dismissed as a medieval cemetery. Schmidt looked at what was sticking out of the ground. He knelt down, and then he said something that became famous among people who study the ancient world. He said, "In 1 minute, I knew I had two possibilities. Either this is not important, or this is the most important site in the world." It was not unimportant. What Schmidt had found was Gobekli Tepe, the world's oldest known temple. Built 12,000 years ago, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the first Egyptian pyramid, at a time when human beings were still classified as hunter-gatherers. The pillars alone defy easy explanation. 43 of them have been uncovered so far, each one quarried from limestone bedrock, shaped, carved, transported, and stood upright. The largest weigh 50 tons. Using nothing but stone hammers and flint blades, tools archaeologists actually found scattered around the site like a forgotten job site. But it wasn't just the size that unsettled researchers, it was the geometry. In 2020, a study published in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal used computer modeling to analyze the layout. What they found was striking. The enclosures weren't random. They were arranged using an equilateral triangle, a shape with 3 sides of perfectly equal length, that regulated the position of the structures with almost mathematical precision. The researchers believe the builders may have stretched a rope to define the shape before placing a single stone. Think about that, 12,000 years ago. No blueprint paper, no measuring instruments, no engineering degree. And yet, they built to a geometric plan that connected 3 separate enclosures into one unified complex. But here is where it gets even stranger. Only about 10% of Gobekli Tepe has been excavated. Archaeologists estimate it will take another 150 years to uncover the full site. At least 15 more enclosures are still buried underground. One of them may date back 15,000 years. 15,000 years. Which means there may be structures at this site older than anything we currently consider part of human civilization. Sitting right there in the ground, waiting. And here is what Gobekli Tepe did to the story we thought we knew. Remember the sequence? Farming first, then temples, then civilization. Gobekli Tepe flips that completely. There is no evidence of farming at the site when it was first built. No domesticated crops, no permanent village nearby. The people who built it were still primarily hunter-gatherers. And yet, they organized. They quarried stone. They fed and housed a workforce large enough to move 50-ton blocks. They built something monumental, which raises a question that archaeologists are still debating today. What if it wasn't farming that created civilization? What if it was the other way around? What if the desire to build a sacred place, to gather, to worship, to mark something larger than themselves, what if that desire came first, and the need to feed the people who came to build it is what forced the invention of agriculture? Not survival driving religion, but religion driving survival. Not necessity creating wonder, but wonder creating necessity. If that's true, it changes everything about what human beings fundamentally are. But Gobekli Tepe is not alone. Because while archaeologists were trying to understand Turkey, something equally astonishing was happening in South America. In January 2024, a team of researchers published a paper in the journal Science. They had spent years flying low over the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador in specially equipped planes, firing laser pulses through the forest canopy and measuring how long it took for those pulses to bounce back. It's called Liidar, light detection and ranging. And what the lasers found, hiding under centuries of jungle growth, made the lead archaeologist say one word when he first saw the data. Wow. Beneath the trees, in Ecuador's Upano Valley, was a city. Not a village, not a settlement, a city. More than 6,000 rectangular earthen platforms, plaza structures, ceremonial mounds, agricultural terraces carved into hillsides, drainage systems, canals, causeways, and roads. Wide, straight roads, cut at perfect right angles, connecting at least 15 separate settlements across an area of 300 square kilometers. This civilization had been there for 2,500 years before anyone from the modern world knew it existed. It changes the way we see Amazonian cultures, said co-author Antoine Dorison. Most people picture small groups, probably naked, living in huts. This shows ancient people lived in complicated urban societies, but it goes even deeper than that. Because when Spanish explorers first sailed down the Amazon River in 1542, a Dominican friar named Gaspar de Carvajal wrote down everything he saw. For stretches of 50 miles at a time, he wrote, they never lost sight of houses. Settlements ran in dense, unbroken lines along the riverbanks. Roads, public squares, large communal buildings, populations he compared to European capitals. For 400 years, historians dismissed every word of it. They assumed he was exaggerating. They assumed the Amazon was empty. He wasn't exaggerating. He was describing exactly what Liidar just confirmed was there. And here is the most haunting part. When Orellana's expedition came down that river, they didn't just observe the Amazon, they infected it. Old world diseases, smallpox, measles, arrived with the explorers. In populations with no immunity, they spread with devastating speed. Some 5 million people may have lived in the Amazon region around 1500. Within a generation after European contact, most of them were gone. The cities emptied. The roads stopped being maintained. The jungle moved in. And within decades, it was as if the whole civilization had never existed. Less than 1% of the Amazon basin has ever been systematically surveyed by archaeologists. Less than 1%. An area nearly twice the size of India remains effectively unmapped. What else is under those trees? Now let's go back in time. Further than Gobekli Tepe. Further than the Amazon. Back to an era when there were no cities, no temples, no agriculture at all. Back to the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age. A world of hunters and gatherers, and a place in southern Spain called the Manga Dolmen. It was built nearly 6,000 years ago. It is a roofed stone chamber, a structure built to last. Its 32 limestone rocks weigh a combined 1,100 tons. The largest single capstone, the flat stone that forms the ceiling, weighs 150 tons. It is the heaviest prehistoric stone ever moved in all of Europe. And in 2024, researchers published a study in the journal Science Advances that analyzed exactly how the builders did it. What they found was not brute force, it was science. Advanced principles of physics, geometry, material science. The builders understood how forces travel through stone. They understood load distribution. They understood how to position weight so a structure would hold, not just for a season, but for millennia. We did not see prehistoric societies as capable or worthy of having science, said one of the researchers. But they did have it. And this engineering prowess, the study concluded, would not be seen again in the archaeological record for thousands of years. In other words, those ancient builders solved problems in stone that later civilizations took thousands of years to rediscover. And then, there is the mind that built all of this, because what we keep underestimating is not just their physical capability, it is their thinking. In 1994, the same year Klaus Schmidt was standing on that hilltop in Turkey, a cave was discovered in southern France, the Chauvet cave. Inside it were paintings, animals, bears, rhinoceroses, lions, rendered with such skill, such movement, such life, that when modern artists first saw them, some of them wept. The paintings are 36,000 years old. 36,000. The hands that made them belong to people we would not recognize as different from ourselves if we passed them on the street. And those hands, painted in near total darkness, deep inside cave systems, far from where anyone lived, working by the light of small oil lamps in chambers where the oxygen was thin. Some researchers believe that the thin air, combined with the flickering light and the complete sensory isolation, may have induced altered states of consciousness. That what happened in those caves was not simply art-making, it was something closer to ritual, to vision, to an attempt to communicate with forces the artists believed were present in the stone itself. We will likely never know for certain what they were trying to say, but we know they were trying to say something important enough to carry oil lamps hundreds of meters underground to say it. And there is one more thing, one discovery that ties all of this together. In 2024, a study published in the journal Time and Mind re-examined a single pillar at Gobekli Tepe, Pillar 43, Enclosure D. It is covered in carvings, symbols, animals, abstract shapes. The researchers argued that these carvings may represent something extraordinary. A lunisolar calendar, 12 lunar months, 11 additional days, a system for tracking both the moon's cycle and the sun's, not just a calendar in the abstract sense, but a specific record of a comet. Around 13,000 years ago, fragments of a comet struck the Earth. The impact triggered a period of sudden, catastrophic climate change. Large animals went extinct. The world the people knew was transformed almost overnight. And the researchers believe that the builders of Gobekli Tepe carved that event into stone. They watched the sky. They understood what they saw. They built a structure to remember it. And then, this is the part that stays with you. When they were finished, they buried it. Not destroyed, not abandoned. Carefully filled in. Sealed underground. Preserved for whoever came next. As if they knew that what they had built was more important than they were. So here is what we are left with. 12,000-year-old temples, built with geometric precision by people who had no writing, no metal, no wheels. 2,500-year-old cities hidden under the Amazon, complete with roads, drainage, and urban planning that we only found because we pointed lasers at the ground from airplanes. 6,000-year-old stone chambers, built using principles of physics that weren't formally rediscovered for thousands of years. 36,000-year-old paintings made in darkness so complete that the artists couldn't even see their own hands. Paintings so beautiful, they make modern artists cry. And a carved record of a comet strike deliberately sealed underground as if someone wanted to make absolutely sure it survived. All of this built by people we casually call primitive. All of this built without a single tool we would recognize today. We have spent centuries assuming that intelligence is recent, that complexity is modern, that the further back you go in time, the less human people were. But the evidence keeps saying something different. It keeps saying that the desire to build, to understand, to remember, to make something that outlasts you, that this is not a modern invention. That is not something civilization gave us. That is what we were before civilization even had a name. We didn't become builders because we became smarter. We built because that is what we have always been. And somewhere under the ground right now, in Turkey, in the Amazon, in places no archaeologist has ever set foot, there are answers waiting to questions we haven't even thought to ask yet. The world our ancestors built is still out there. We just haven't found most of it.